The Veterinary Institute of Convergent Studies occupied the inner ring of Station Kale 9, a place where 17 species sent their brightest young minds to learn how to exist near each other without causing diplomatic incidents. Most of the time, it worked. March arrived on a Tuesday, though Tuesday meant nothing on Kale 9, where the station rotated through artificial light cycles calibrated to please no species fully and offend none completely. She arrived with one bag, a sealed transfer file, and the particular kind of quietness that isn't shyness. It's something else. The quietness of someone who has learned that most situations resolve themselves if you wait long enough. The intake officer, a Dovari named Clerk Cecil, processed her documents with 4 of his 6 manipulator limbs, while the other 2 tapped idly against his desk in a rhythm that meant mild professional boredom in Dovari body language. He paused when he reached her planetary origin designation. Kara, 3, he said. Yes, Mara said. He looked at her again, differently this time. Karov. 3 was what the rest of the populated galaxy called a Deathworld, not as an insult, as a technical classification. Atmospheric pressure 3 times galactic standard. Gravity 1.4. Microbial load in the soil alone was enough to dissolve the structural proteins of 6 known species. The megafauna were, well, the classification documents used the word persistent. What they meant was, they keep coming even after you've already killed them twice. Humans from Karov. 3 were not typical humans. Even by the standards of baseline humanity, which the rest of the galaxy already found quietly alarming, Karov. 3 colonists were something the xenobiological community had been writing careful papers about for 30 years. Papers with titles like Adaptive Stress Tolerance in Third-Generation Deathworld Populations and Why Do They Smile When Injured? A Neurochemical Survey. You'll be in Section 7, Clerk Cecil said, and stamped her file faster than he'd stamped anyone else's that morning. Section 7 was the Advanced Xenocultural Studies cohort, 12 students. For species represented before Mara walked in and made it 5. She took a seat near the window, the long curved viewport that looked out onto the station's external scaffold, where maintenance drones crawl like slow insects across the hull. She set her bag down. She looked out the window for a moment, studying the drones with a calm, assessing expression of someone cataloging potential threats by habit rather than anxiety. Nobody spoke to her that first morning. The instructor, a human woman named Professor Dale, who had been teaching xenocultural integration for 20 years and had the specific exhaustion of someone who loved their work but found most people disappointing, introduced Mara briefly and moved on. Today, Professor Dale said, pulling up the holographic curriculum wall, we continue with conflict resolution frameworks across species-specific honor systems. Specifically, we are going to examine what happens when an honor response that is proportionate within its own cultural system is catastrophically disproportionate outside it. 3 of the Dovari students shifted in their seats. One of the Tehesi students, a tall being with bioluminescent patches along its throat, dimmed those patches slightly, the Tehesi equivalent of looking at the floor. Mara looked at the curriculum wall. Then she looked at the other students. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did, a small, private calibration. She had been in rooms like this before. Not this room, but rooms with a specific atmospheric pressure. The kind that meant something already happened here, and everyone is still living inside it. His name was Draven Kaelsor, and he was Tehesi. The Tehesi were tall, bilaterally symmetrical, with iridescent skin that shifted through emotional registers the way a human face shifts expression, except the Tehesi couldn't control it. Every feeling they had was visible to anyone who could read the patterns. It was considered, in Tehesi culture, the foundation of their entire ethical system. You could not lie. You could not pretend. The light in your skin would betray you. This made Tehesi as a species extraordinarily honest. It also made them extraordinarily vulnerable to shame. Draven was 17 years old in human equivalent developmental terms. He was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that gets you into Section 7 of the Veterinary Institute at 17. He was also carrying something. Mara could see at the moment she looked at him, not because she was psychic or specially perceptive, but because she had grown up on a world where reading body language was a survival skill calibrated to creatures that had no language at all. She was very good at it. He sat in the back left corner. His bioluminescent patches were dull, almost suppressed, in a species whose emotional state was involuntarily broadcast. Suppression didn't mean absence. It meant effort. It meant he was working very hard to feel less than he was feeling. She filed this away. She didn't do anything with it yet. On care of. 3. You didn't approach a creature mid-suppression. You waited. The first week passed. Mara learned the rhythms of Section 7. She was good at xenocultural studies the way some people are good at breathing. Not because she studied academically, but because she'd done nothing else her entire life. Care of 3's colony infrastructure required constant interspecies coordination. You learned to read the room before you entered it. You learned to understand that what looked like aggression was sometimes communication, and what looked like communication was sometimes threat. She turned in clean work. She answered questions when called on. She ate lunch alone, not out of loneliness, but because the cafeteria's layout let her sit with her back to the wall and a clear line of sight to both exits. She did this without thinking about it. Professor Dale noticed. Care of 3, she said one afternoon after the other students had left, looking at Mara with the expression of someone doing a quiet calculation. Yes, Mara said. Is this your first time off-world? 3rd. Dale nodded. How are you finding it? Mara considered this. Loud, she said finally. Emotionally. Dale almost smiled. Yes, it is. His name before he shortened it had been Draven Kaelsora von Tessel, which in Tehesi translates roughly as Draven, of the Kaelsor family line, witnessed by von Tessel. The last part mattered. In Tehesi culture, the witness name was a family member who had formally observed your birth and taken on the spiritual obligation of your development. Draven's witness name was his uncle. His uncle had been dead for 4 months. The way his uncle died was not something Draven had told anyone at the Institute. The file that Professor Dale had read said, family bereavement, counseling recommended. The file did not say what Draven's own skin had been broadcasting every day for 4 months. Grief so deep it had started to calcify into something else, something colder. In Tehesi honor culture, when your witness name died before their obligation to you was complete, the ethical weight didn't dissolve. It transferred. Specifically, it transferred to anyone who had caused the incompletion. In the case of Draven's uncle, the cause had been a territorial dispute with a Dovari commercial operation that had, through a series of legal maneuvers that were technically lawful and completely unconscionable, seized a land his uncle's family had worked for generations. The stress of the displacement had killed him, not dramatically, just the way ordinary devastation kills ordinary people. Quietly, over months. Draven had not done anything about this. He was 17 and brilliant and completely powerless, and he had come to the Institute because there was nowhere else to go and because his mother had said go, learn, build something they can't take. But the weight was still there, and it had started to look from the inside like a knife, not metaphorically. The Dovari student's name was Felkassin. He was also 17, also brilliant, also in Section 7. He was the youngest son of the commercial operation that had seized Draven's family land. He didn't know this. His family had dozens of commercial operations across 6 systems. He was a child who had been sent away to school the way children of commercial families are sent away, to become something other than what their parents were, or to become exactly what their parents were, depending on which way the education cut. He was not, as far as Mara could observe, a bad person. He was thoughtless in the way 17-year-olds from wealthy families are thoughtless, not malicious, just unexamined. He had no idea that every time he sat down near Draven in Professor Dale's class, Draven's suppressed bioluminescence flickered with something that anyone fluent in Tehesi emotional signaling would have immediately recognized as not grief. Mara was fluent in Tehesi emotional signaling. She'd taken 3 electives in nonverbal xenocommunication on Karov. 3, because knowing what something was feeling before it moved could be the difference between walking away and not. She watched. She waited. She kept her expression neutral. It was a group project. Professor Dale had structured it specifically to force interspecies collaboration. Draven and Felkassin assigned to the same 4-person team, along with a Dovari girl named Cicely and Mara. In retrospect, Mara would think. Dale didn't know. She couldn't have known. The assignment was designed to build exactly the bridges it was about to burn. They were working on a conflict resolution case study, real historical incident, 2 species, territorial dispute, documented outcome. The irony was so complete it almost felt authored. Fel Casson had been talking for 11 minutes. He was presenting their group's preliminary analysis, and he was good at it. Clear, organized, the particular fluency of someone who had been prepared for a boardroom since childhood. He was using the territorial dispute in the case study as a clean example of legal process superseding cultural claim. The documentation shows, he said, gesturing at the holographic citations, that in every case where commercial law and traditional use claim came into conflict, the legal framework produced a more stable long-term outcome. Emotionally difficult, yes, but stable. Draven's skin lit up, not subtly, not the carefully suppressed flicker Mara had been watching for 2 weeks. It blazed gold and deep red, which in Tehesi's signaling was the involuntary display of, I am past the threshold where I can govern my response. And then he stood up, and then he reached into his bag. The knife was traditional, Tehesi honor blade, the kind used in formal witness rites, not a weapon in its original cultural context. In its current context, in the hands of a 17-year-old whose bioluminescence was screaming in a frequency that meant I have nothing left to lose. It was exactly a weapon. The room stopped. Fel Casson went pale. Cicely made a sound that wasn't a word. Professor Dale was on the far side of the room and moving, but slowly. Slowly the way adults move when they're calculating whether fast movement will escalate. Draven was shaking. The gold red in his skin pulsed. He wasn't looking at the knife. He was looking at Fel Casson with an expression that was not rage, which would have been simpler, but grief that had nowhere else to go. And Mara said, I know. Her voice was quiet, not soft. Quiet has weight that soft doesn't. It carried. Everyone looked at her. She was smiling, not a large smile, not a reassuring, performative, everything is fine smile. It was small and specific, and it reached her eyes. And in the context of that room with a knife and a boy whose skin was broadcasting despair in every color had, the smile was the strangest thing anyone present had ever seen. Later, days later, weeks later, both Professor Dale and Cicely would try to describe it and fail. It wasn't happy, Cicely would say, but it wasn't sad either. Dale would write in her incident report, the smile appeared to function as a form of communication I am not qualified to categorize. On care of 3, you smile at the thing coming toward you, not because you're unafraid, not because it isn't dangerous, but because the smile is a signal that says, I see you. I am not pretending you are something smaller than you are. I am not going to lie to you about what this moment costs. It was not a human smile in the universal sense. It was a care of 3 smile. It was a smile of someone who grew up next to things that could kill them and chose, every morning, to go outside anyway. Draven saw it. His skin flickered. The gold red stuttered. I know, Mara said again. She wasn't looking at the knife. She was looking at his face. About Von Tessel. About the land. About what Fel Casson's family did. The room was completely silent. Fel Casson made a small, confused sound. What? I read the regional commerce filings, Mara said. Still to Draven, still with that quiet weight in her voice. When I was trying to understand why your patches were doing what they were doing, I wanted to know what you were carrying before I understood whether I needed to be near it or not. She paused. I'm from care of 3. We do a lot of risk assessment. Something in Draven's shaking slowed, just slightly. The knife isn't what you want, Mara said. It's the only thing left that feels like it has weight equal to what you lost. But it doesn't. It just ends 2 lives instead of ending 1 grief. He sat down slowly, not because anyone told him to, because his legs stopped working with full conviction. I don't understand, he said. What did my family do? The silence of the room changed shape. It had been the silence of a crisis. Now it became the silence of something worse. The silence of someone about to be told the truth about themselves from the outside, the truth that you can't argue with because it comes with documentation. Mara looked at him. Her expression was not unkind. It was precise. Your family's commercial subsidiary. Cass and Veth Resource Partners filed 7 successive boundary displacement petitions against agricultural use claims in the Dehesi Outer Territories 4 years ago. The last petition was filed 18 months ago. It was approved. The families displaced included the F. von Tessel witness line. Draven's uncle. She let that sit. He died 4 months ago, she said. Displacement stress. It's documented. Felkasson looked at Draven. Draven's skin had gone to something Mara had not seen from him before, a color she had to think about before she recognized it. It was a Dehesi equivalent of a wound exposed. Not anger, not grief, just open. I didn't know, Felkasson said. I know you didn't know, Mara said. That's part of the problem. Not the whole problem, but part of it. Professor Dale had reached the front of the room by now. She was standing very still, doing what experienced teachers sometimes do in the middle of something real. Nothing. Watching. Trusting the moment over her own instinct to intervene. You should put the knife down, Mara said to Draven. Not as a command. As a statement of fact, the way you'd say the airlock seal is compromised, not to alarm, but because the information was necessary. Draven looked at the knife as if he'd half forgotten it was there. He put on the desk. The room exhaled. The Institute's conflict response protocol required documentation, counseling referrals, a review board, and provisional suspension pending psychological evaluation. All of this happened. It happened in the proper order with the proper forms and the proper administrative gravity. What the protocol did not account for was what happened in the 4 hours between the incident and the review board convening, during which Felkasson sat in the corridor outside the counseling suite and did not move. Mara found him there when she came back from giving her witness statement. She sat down next to him, not close enough to crowd, far enough to be a choice. My father's going to say the filings were legal, Felkasson said. He wasn't speaking to her specifically. He was speaking to the middle distance, the way people do when they're working something out in real time. They were, Mara said. He looked at her. Legal and wrong are not the same category, she said. Kirov. 3 is almost no formal legal infrastructure. Too expensive to maintain in our atmospheric conditions. We've had to build something else. We have about 40 years of practical ethics developed from direct consequences. You do something wrong on Kirov. 3, you usually find out immediately because the environment doesn't buffer feedback. That sounds terrifying. It is, she said. It's also clarifying. He was quiet for a long moment. What am I supposed to do with this? Mara considered the question seriously. I don't know exactly, but I think you start by knowing. Actually knowing, not just knowing about it. There's a difference. How do you tell the difference? It changes what you do next, she said. Draven's evaluation took 3 days. During those 3 days, Mara filed a supplemental report with the review board, not defending the knife. She was specific about that in the report's opening paragraph. The knife was not defensible, but the weight that produced the knife was real and documented, and the board should understand the full architecture of the moment before deciding what to build from its rubble. She attached the commerce filings. She attached the displacement record. She attached a translated excerpt of the Dehesi cultural framework surrounding witness name obligation, with annotation explaining why incomplete witness obligation created a specific kind of ethical pressure that had no release valve within the existing interspecies legal framework. She had written the annotation herself in clean technical prose at 2 a.m. because she couldn't sleep and because it needed to exist and no one else was going to write it. Professor Dale read the report and then read it again and then sat quietly at her desk for a while. The review board did not expel Draven. This was not, as some of the other Section 7 students initially assumed, because Mara's report had softened them. Review boards at institutions like Vethri were not softened easily. They had seen incidents. They had processed consequences. They didn't expel Draven because of something they found when they pulled his full file at Mara's recommendation. The supplemental documentation she had flagged specifically a clause in the Vethri Institute's founding charter that almost no one had invoked in its 60-year institutional history. The charter had been written by a coalition of species who had, at the time of the Institute's founding, just finished a 40-year conflict that had cost all of them catastrophically. The people who wrote the charter were not optimists. They were people who had paid full price for the education they were trying to encode into institutional law. They had included in Article 7 a provision called the Tesseract Clause, named after a Dovari philosopher, which stated that when a student's crisis behavior could be directly traced to an unresolved structural injustice involving another enrolled student's family or institution, the appropriate response was not punitive isolation, but structured accountability resolution. The clause had never been used. It had been included in the charter and then politely ignored for 60 years by administrators who found it impractical. Mara had found it at 1:15 in the morning, 3 pages into the charter document, and had cited it in her supplemental report with the specific section and paragraph number. When the review board's legal consultant confirmed the clause was valid and binding, there was a long institutional silence of the kind that precedes significant change. Felcassen's family was formally notified, not by the board. They were careful about jurisdiction, by Felcassen himself, who had spent 3 days in the corridor and in his room, and in the counseling suite doing the thing Mara had described. Actually knowing, not just knowing about it. He called his father. The call lasted 47 minutes. He didn't tell anyone what was said, but afterward, his face had the specific exhaustion of someone who has put something down that they've been carrying without knowing it. The unexpected part, the part nobody had predicted, including Mara, was Draven's response to all of it. He came back from evaluation on the 4th day, and he walked into Section 7, and he sat down in his usual seat, and his bioluminescent patches were doing something none of them had ever seen from him. Not the suppressed gray, not the blazing gold red. Something quieter, a deep, slow blue that moved through him like light through water. Cicely, who was the most fluent Tehesi reader in the group, leaned over to Mara during the break and said quietly, "Do you know what that color means?" "No," Mara said. "Tell me." "It's the color for I am still here," Cicely said. "It's what Tehesi show when they come back from something they weren't sure they'd come back from." Mara looked at Draven. He was reading the day's assignment. His patches moved slow and steady, deep blue cycling through something close to, not peace. Peace was too resolved a word. Something more like continuation, the decision to continue. She didn't say anything. On care of. 3. You didn't narrate a creature's survival back to it. You just acknowledged it with your presence. You stayed in the room. She opened her assignment. A month later, Professor Dale asked Mara to stay after class. It was late afternoon in the station's artificial cycle, and the light through the viewport was doing something amber and long that didn't resemble any natural sunset, but tried to, the way all artificial things try to reach toward what they were approximating. The smile, Dale said. Mara waited. In the incident, when Draven drew the knife, you smiled. Dale wasn't accusatory. She was the kind of curious that takes years to develop. Curious without agenda. Curious as a discipline. I've been thinking about it for a month. What was that? Mara looked out the viewport for a moment. The maintenance drones were crawling across the hull again. Same as the first day. On care of 3, she said, when you encounter something that could kill you, there are 2 responses that don't work. The first is pretending it's smaller than it is. That never works, because the thing knows what it is even if you don't. The second is meeting it with something equal and opposite, because then you just have 2 dangerous things moving at each other. She paused. The third option is the only one that has any record of actually working. You show it that you're not pretending. You show it that you see it clearly and you're not going to lie about what it is. And somehow, not always, but often enough that we kept doing for 3 generations, that changes the encounter. Dale was quiet. Draven wasn't a creature, Mara said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying I treat him like an animal. I'm saying the principle is the same. He was in a place where everything around him was either minimizing what he felt or afraid of it. Both of those responses were making him more dangerous, not less, because they were confirming his isolation. And the smile said something else. The smile said, I see the full size of what you're carrying. I'm not scared of the size of it, and I'm not going to pretend it's smaller to make myself more comfortable. Dale thought about this for a long time. Outside, a maintenance drone paused on the hull, its sensors sweeping slowly across a section of plating, reading for damage with the patient, methodical attention of something that had no feelings about what it found. It just reported accurately what was there. That's a very specific thing to know how to do, Dale said finally. It's a survival skill, Mara said. Most things are where I'm from. She picked up her bag. She looked out the viewport one more time. The drones, the scaffold, the long, dark past the station's edge where nothing was approximating anything, where space was just space, honest and enormous and indifferent. She smiled, that same smile. Small, specific, reaching the eyes. The difference, she said, is that here I get to use it for something other than surviving. She left. Professor Dale stayed at her desk for a while, watching the artificial amber light move across the room, and thought about all the things institutions teach and all the things they never think to. Outside, the maintenance drones kept reading the hull, patient, accurate, reporting what was there.